Thank you. Somebody's named Home and iPad. Could you put your name in? Bob, you can change their name also. You go on the three dots and you can rename.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone, please put in your full name. And Karen, do you have a place for emails if you'd like to get in touch with people?
We have this form that I'm going to put in the chat now, and people can fill out this form, and wherever it is, let me just get it.
Barbara Delancey, good to see you.
So actually, I'm going to put two things in. This is to sign up, and then there's a form to get information. Copy link. Okay. Because the city's information, if you put in city of yes for the information for city planning, you'll end up with actually a commercial. And if you really want to like read this, you should look at the actual documents. They're very large. One's 600, another's like 1,000. But you only really have to read the beginning part, where they give you the project description and what's included in it. And so Bob, can you see that? That's the form to sign in, and you have to keep repeating it for when people come in, because if you come in, you don't get to see the old things.
So please do rename yourself so you can participate if you are using your full name first and last. Thanks for including your organizational connection if you have one.
And this is the next one that's coming in is the information link. It's on BCQ's webpage because it's easy to put stuff there, and we'll probably upload stuff like information data on that webpage, that one webpage there. So that the second link is an information link, and the first link is to sign up on the Google Drive. You could do that later at the end. We'll do it again.
Okay, Karen and Laura, I think I'm ready to roll. So whenever you want me to get started.
All right, so maybe I'll start. And
Sure.
Hi everybody. You probably know it already, but I'm Karen Argenti, and
Karen, we can't see your mouth.
Okay.
And only see your glasses, just to let you know the way that the of the
where's my picture? Right, I can't see myself at all.
There we go.
That's better.
That's better. Thank you.
Okay. So wait, here, let me get the agenda. Okay, so the agenda says that I read you the rules. I'm Karen. I'm sorry about the picture thing. We are recording this, and it will be available like maybe in a day or two on YouTube, probably linked on that. Well, we'll email it out. We're not going to link it. And I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for coming. We got a nice group, 39 people so far, and it's early. So now I'd like to introduce Laura Spolta, who's my partner in crime at this enterprise. Laura, are you there?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hi. Welcome. Many of us on this call tonight are representing civic groups located all over the Bronx. And we share concerns about impacts from the city's proposed zoning changes and fear our neighborhoods will end up as collateral damage from inappropriate development, increased flooding, reduction in open space, lack of infrastructure, and many other serious issues. The necessity of forming an ad hoc coalition protect Bronx neighborhoods from overdevelopment was born out of Karen and our frustration and fear of a Manhattan-centric administration that trivializes the character of our neighborhoods. We are here tonight because 3 weeks ago, I received a newsletter from the Queens Civic Congress, an umbrella group of approximately 70 civic organizations. And I'll quote that newsletter. "We currently face an extinction level event from Mayor Adams' City of Yes set of zoning proposals. Should these proposals be adopted, the damage to our communities will be catastrophic. We learned that the Queens Civic Congress retained Paul Graciano, an urban planner, to support their communities. Karen Argenti and I contacted Paul, and we were impressed with his knowledge and efforts to build coalitions in Queens, of course, his home base, Brooklyn and Staten Island, and even beyond. He did not have any Bronx contacts and was clearly happy to hear from us. And we said, we are going to change that. Paul is a Queens native with 30 years of zoning and advocacy experience. He surveyed and co-designed the contextual rezoning plans for Bayside, College Point, Douglaston, Little Neck, North Flushing, and Whitestone that helped protect them from overdevelopment. Among many other accomplishments, he authored the Broadway Flushing National Register Historic District Nomination Report and co-authored the R2A Anti-McMansion for one-family zones, among many other city and state advocacy efforts. We are delighted that Paul is able to join us tonight. And so without any further ado, Paul Graciano, you're on.
Thanks so much, Laura and Karen, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I think I have 20 minutes organized for me. I'm gonna ask you for an additional 3, because I just want to give everyone kind of a global background as to why we are where we are. So over the last 3 years, we have essentially been in a constant state of, I can only describe it as assault from the government, from our own elected officials. Starting in 2020, late 2020, almost exactly 3 years ago, the former Speaker of the City Council, Corey Johnson, came out with a plan. Some of you may remember it, called Planning Together. And when I started reading the document, I was extremely alarmed because there were all kinds of falsehoods in the document, which immediately made me suspicious. But the thrust of it was the elimination of single-family zoning in the city of New York. Every community board would have to upzone every decade in perpetuity. And if the community boards and the city council members could not agree on an area to upzone, then there would be a new czar created above city planning, a new city planning above city planning, which would then choose which areas to upzone every decade in perpetuity, and a whole host of other issues that were brought up. I helped to create a coalition. I ended up speaking in front of dozens of community boards, and luckily that died a quick death in February of 2021. Fast forward to the end of 2021, Governor Hochul took over after former Governor Cuomo resigned. And at the beginning of 2022, I was one of the 100 non-elected officials to watch the State of the State address, where she made one sentence very clear, and it was, "We're going to get rid of outdated zoning laws that are holding back housing supply." And I said, let me look into this. And in the published State of the State address, it was the elimination of single-family zoning across the state of New York, introduction of ADUs on every property, taking away of home rule, which is actually enshrined in the state constitution, where localities have the ability to create their own land use and other laws in equal level to the state government. The creation of transit-oriented development, which is to densify around train stations, which in theory is reasonable, but the devil is always in the details. And the blanket amnesty for all illegal conversions in the city of New York, and the removal of the multiple dwelling law, which guides safety in our building code. Those were a number, and there were numbers of others that she proposed. I created a statewide coalition called Save One Family New York. Within a month, we had it all killed, with the exception of the amnesty. We got that taken out of the budget. She did this as an omnibus budget bill. 2022, we had it removed. when she won re-election, I warned everyone she was going to come back again. And sure enough, this year in January, she came back with the Housing Compact. And many of you may remember the Housing Compact, which would have created mandatory increases in every village, town, and city and county in perpetuity in the state of New York for housing, ADUs, transit-oriented development around every train and subway station to a minimum of 50 units per acre, which is extremely dense, and lots of other proposals. Reactivated Save One Family. We had a giant fight, and the reason the budget was late was because she refused to budge until the very end when we finally beat it. While that was happening, the mayor announced his City of Yes proposals, and he also called it Get Stuff Built. He had the Blast Committee, all of these things. We didn't really know the details. We knew some ideas of what were coming up, but we didn't know the details until the scope of work for the housing piece came out at the end of September. The economic, obviously, carbon neutrality is going to be approved next week, the carbon neutrality piece of this, which really deals with energy efficiencies. There's some things in there that are not very great, but it's kind of a mixed bag. The economic opportunity piece, on the other hand, is in my opinion, horrible. And the housing piece is literally a nuclear bomb. So these are all things we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to show you a presentation now on a similar neighborhood to Riverdale in Queens, Douglaston, and Little Neck, which I think will give you some ideas as to how this is going to affect many, many, many neighborhoods in the city of New York. So I'm going to share the screen, if that's okay. Let me do this. I've only done this a few times, but I'm not quite great. Oh, wait, I have to click on this. 1 second. There we go. Nope, that's a stop video. I should have something that says
Down at the bottom.
share screen. I got it. Share screen. Here we go.
Okay.
No, it's not showing that. It's saying whiteboard. Okay, let's try that again. Okay. Here we go. Let's try that. Share screen. Here we go. Okay, got it. Is that coming up?
Yes,
Everyone sees it?
yes. You can make it a
Okay.
little bigger, I guess. Oh, no, you want the full page. I got it.
Yeah, I want the full page. Yeah,
I got it. I got it. Okay.
Yep. Okay. So again, folks, this is a presentation I just finished. I've shown it a few times. I showed it last night in front of 150 concerned citizens and various elected officials in Queens. I showed it 2 nights ago in another civic organization with 75 members. So this is, again, I'm going to close this window here. Okay, there we go. So you should be seeing this. So let me go through this. I'm going to read this for everybody because it's kind of small. This year, Mayor Eric Adams has initiated the City of Yes set of zoning proposals, carbon neutrality, economic opportunity, and housing opportunity. In this report, we will be addressing housing opportunity, which focuses heavily on lower density zones in New York City. We will also be addressing economic opportunity at the end. So there are 5 main changes to this proposal. There are several dozen other changes, which we will briefly touch on, a couple of them, but the 5 main choices are the authorization of accessory dwelling units on all 1 and 2 family properties in New York City, particularly those in 1 and 2 family zones, which make up a relatively significant portion of the city, but not very much comparatively to the rest of the city. And again, just to make people understand, the amount of single family zoning in the city of New York is 15% of the city of New York is single family, and another 8 or 9% is 2 family. The rest of the city is multi-family zoning. This is very different from most other cities in the country. Most other cities are 65, 75, 85% single family zoning. We are 15 and 25% single and 2 family zoning. So the idea that exclusionary zoning, quote unquote, which is single and 2 family zoning, in their minds, is the cause of the housing crisis, which is what's written in this document, which is shockingly incorrect, is laughable. This would allow new units in all 1 and 2 family properties, like I said, basements, cellars, attics, garage conversions, new houses behind your houses in your backyards, up to 800 square feet. Okay. The second would be transit-oriented development. This is, again, as I said, areas that are supposedly near subways and trains. the city has come up with a map showing where the transit-oriented zones are. Many of them are nowhere near train stations or subway stations or even bus lines. So I'm not sure what their criteria is, but it's very alarming. It takes up over a third of Queens and a third of Brooklyn, significant parts of the Bronx as well, including in Board 8 and other boards as well, Board 10, Board 11, et cetera. Impose these areas with this new zone, this transit-oriented development zone. So if you're in this zone, they would be able to, on wide streets, 75 feet or wider, every parcel over 5,000 square feet, every piece of property, 5,000 square feet or more, would be allowed to have an apartment building. So even if you're in a single family zone, you'd be allowed to build an apartment building as a developer or an owner, okay? And you could also aggregate multiple properties or assemble multiple properties to get to that 5,000 square feet to make that apartment building ability. In addition, narrow streets will be allowed to have apartment buildings like this on corner properties. This would affect all R1 through R5 zoning, but it really targets the 1 and 2 family zoning, which tend to have the larger lots in general. And there's a whole list of neighborhoods that I list. The third piece is the establishment of town center zoning. Their definition of town center zoning is all commercial overlays in R1 through R5 zones, many of which currently have 1 or 2 story commercial buildings on them. They would all be allowed to have up to 4 stories of residential above the commercial. This is a huge increase in density in these areas. The fourth is to literally dismantle the zoning resolution and our basic zoning framework. So for example, in an R2 zone, which I know you have some of in your district, you currently have a 3,800 square foot lot that you need and a 40-foot wide lot to build a home. You would now need a 30-foot wide lot instead of a 40-foot wide lot and a 2,850 square foot property, allowing additional subdivisions, plus setbacks would change, height would change, floor area ratio, the amount of the building to the size of the property would change. All of this would change. I'll go into that as we go through the presentation. And finally, the elimination of all parking requirements, all on-site property requirements for all new residential development throughout New York City, whether it's a 1-family home or a 300-unit apartment building, there would be no parking requirements, which, as we know, is not conducive to reality. While the folks who believe that cars are evil, that's fine for them to believe that, but most people in many parts of the city need cars to survive. And even those people who take public transportation often have cars when they get home. So it's really just a pretty amazing statement to make. So let's start the presentation. This is Douglaston and Little Neck, north of Northern Boulevard. Northern Boulevard is this area right here. This is the street, Northern Boulevard. This is the Nassau County line. So everything you see past there is actually Nassau County. So this is just hugging the Nassau County line. The area you see in yellow are the single family zones. There are small portions of 2-family zoning, R3-1 zoning, which allow for 1 and 2 family detached and semi-attached houses. So there's a small amount of it, but my analysis is only for the single family zoning. The single family zoning is R11 zoning, which again, I know you have in Board 8, R12 zoning, and R2A zoning. R2A is the anti-McMansion zoning that was briefly brought up by Laura. The areas in blue are the areas that would be under the transit-oriented development map. And let me just show you, I'm sorry, let me show you this very briefly. This is Community Board 11, and these are the areas that would be considered for transit-oriented development to be in this zone, and that's Auburndale on the left, this is Bayside, this is Douglaston and Little Neck, and this is an area called Hollis Hills and Oakland Gardens down here, which by the way are near no transit, no station, nothing, not even a bus line. So we're not quite sure why that was included, but I just wanted to give you an understanding that, and you can kind of see in the areas to the west here, there are other attached areas. That's a different community board. So I just left that alone, but these are huge areas that would be affected by that. Okay, so back to here. So clearly the vast majority of the area north of Northern Boulevard would be affected by this transit zone. These are the areas within the one family zoning that would be affected, okay? And these are the wide streets. These are the streets that are 75 feet wide or wider, where the TODs would be allowed on every property 5,000 square feet or larger, as opposed to just the corners. So currently, there are 1,485 properties in Douglaston and Little Neck in the one family zones. 89.6% of them are single family, and another 5% or so are vacant lots or community facilities, which are all allowed under the current zoning. So you have about a 95% compliance rate in the area. You also have two neighborhoods, Douglas Manor and Westmoreland, which actually have private deed restrictions. I know in your community board, you have Fieldston, which is one of those areas that has private deed restrictions. They have additional restrictions on them that prohibit anything more than a one family house, or no commercial is prohibited, et cetera. They take up about 2/3 of the area. And we also have two historic districts, the Douglaston Historic District, which covers most of Douglas Manor, and Douglaston Hill. Approximately half of the whole area covered by this study is in landmark districts. Of the one family zoning, 1,107 of those 1,485 properties are actually in the TOD zone. So it's approximately 75% of the properties are within the zone, and only about half of Douglas Manor, the northern half, is not in it, and 10 properties in the area called Little Neck Pines. The map you see here shows every single property that would be eligible for an apartment building in these one family zones, according to this new TOD proposal. As you can see, it's a fairly substantial area. And in fact, this gives you a better idea. This is property by property. They range in size from 5,000 square feet to 189,225 square feet. And this does not include additional assemblages. Like I said, if someone managed to buy, a developer bought one or two houses together to get to that 5,000 square feet, there would be many, many more properties that would be eligible for this proposal. These are the areas, again, showing the areas under deed restrictions that would have those TOD apartment building potential. And again, in the landmark districts as well. And just, for those of you who are unfamiliar, landmarking is a design district. It does not protect any particular occupancy. If most historic districts, with the exception of places like Fieldston and Riverdale on Hudson and Douglaston and a few others, are in multifamily zones. They're in apartment zones. They're in brownstones. They're in, they don't really care about that kind of stuff. So they care about design and the way it looks. These are the types of, this is taken directly from the city planning scope of work. These are the kinds of buildings that they believe should be built in these neighborhoods. And it goes on to say in the document that the zoning resolution of 1961 was a mistake. They should have never prohibited these kinds of buildings from being built in low density zones, particularly 1 and 2 family zones. Obviously, I would beg to differ. And actually, I looked up almost all of the places where these buildings are, and they're mostly in zones that are much higher density than the zones that they're saying they should be in. So of the 1,107 lots that are in the TOD zone, 256 of them would be affected by the TOD zone as it stands now, again, without accumulating more assemblages. So it's about a little under 25% of the properties would be affected by this. Of those, about 85% of them are single family. And again, many of the rest are community facilities or vacant. So the new floor area ratio, instead of a 0.5, which is what it is today, it would be doubled to a 1.0. So what that means is if you have a 5,000 square foot lot, you can build a 5,000 square foot building. And this number here, it's called the DUF. It's the dwelling unit factor. That is actually a number that is each zone, multifamily zone, has this number. And what it means is whatever square footage you are allowed to build, you divide that square footage by this number, and that's the number of units that you would be able to build. So in most of the other zones, I mean, there is no 500 DUF, by the way. I just want to make that dwelling unit factor. There's 680, 730, 890, much higher numbers. The mayor is proposing to change all of them for every zone to 500, high density and low density, and introduce them into single family zoning, because we don't have them now. Right now, it's the size of your lot determines how many properties, how many single family homes or 2-family homes you can build in the 1 and 2 family zones. So based on that number, and again, 5,000 square feet being the smallest lot you can have, 5,000 divided by 500 is 10 units. So based on that, I did the numbers for all of these parcels, and the number of units that can be built on these 256 lots is 4,894. So it is a 2,000% increase, more or less, from the current number of properties. And again, not all of them even have buildings on them because many of them are vacant. So I'm going to show you a few examples. This is a building, it's a ranch house on Douglaston Parkway. It is not in a historic district. It's in a single family zone. It is not in a restricted, deed restricted neighborhood. But it's a fairly large lot, 12,880 square foot lot. It's got a 1,700 square foot house. It's a ranch house. This is a slightly askew shot, so it's going to look a little weird, but it could currently be either subdivided into 2 properties, or it could have a rather large house on it today. This is the basic size and bulk of what the building would look like. I'm not an architect, so please forgive me for my scribbling, but this gives you an idea of the 25 unit building that could be on this site. Here's another property. This is a vacant lot on 234th Street behind Douglaston Parkway. It's this property right here. It's 14,689 square feet. And that's the basic bulk that could be on this property. And that would generate a 29 unit building where currently they could build 3 or 4 single family homes. Again, you'll notice there's no parking because there's no parking requirements under this proposal. The next property is in Little Neck, north of the Long Island Expressway. It's the classic starter home built in the late 50s, early 60s. It's a little ranch house. It's under 1,000 square feet. So someone currently could build about a 2,700 square foot house there, more than 2.5 times the size what's there now. But under the current proposal, this would be something to this effect, a 10-unit apartment building, approximately this large. The fourth one is in a deed restricted area, and we will talk a little bit about that. A 10,000 square foot lot. It's this property right here. And that 10,000 square foot lot with a 2,800 square foot house could generate a 10,000 square foot building with about 20 units. And finally, here's a building in both a deed restricted and landmark district. Now, this is a building that is not historic. It's in a historic district, but it's what we call a non-contributing building, as it was built in 1980, and the area was adopted as in 1997 as a district. So it doesn't even make it by the 30-year cutoff, but it's a modern building. It's a modern house. So the Landmarks Commission would certainly allow it to be demolished today to be replaced by another building that they would approve a design for. This building is on a 6,300 square foot lot, so you would end up having a 12-unit apartment building on this property. Because again, they do not care about the occupancy, they care about the design. So that's the transit-oriented development. Let's talk about the town center zoning. Everything you see here are blue. These are the commercial overlays on Northern Boulevard and Douglaston Parkway, and this is the train station right here. They want to raise the residential FAR for these areas to a 1.0 and keep the commercial at 1.0 for a maximum of 1.5, which would mean that the commercial would be a 0.5 and the residential would be a 1.0 if they were going to be building residential units above commercial. Currently, there are 225 residential units on these strips. There's a few apartment buildings. There are typical 1920s commercial buildings where you have a retail on the first floor and then a couple of units above. Many of them actually affordable units, by the way, currently. Well, those 225 units could be replaced with 2,028 units. And then we get to the accessory dwelling units. So ADUs, again, would be allowed on every single property. I'm saying conservatively 1 ADU. On many properties, probably 2 or perhaps 3 ADUs perhaps could be allowed, depending on how they were designed within the property and et cetera, based on the guidelines. But let's just be conservative and say 1 ADU per property. So as you can see, there are 89.4% of the properties are 1 family. There's another 43 properties that are 2 family and 91 vacant properties, which most of which are buildable. So those 3 categories together make up about 97% or 96% of the current properties in all of the single family areas. This does not include the changes, the basic changes to the zoning regulations that they are proposing. And we'll get to that. So based on that, if you add the transit-oriented development, 4,894, the town center development, 2,028, and the ADUs, which would be the remainder of the properties, 1,229, you get a new residential unit count of 8,151 units, where there are currently 1,772 units. This is a 460% increase in residential units. And this is just one small neighborhood in New York City. And I want to mention, remember, this program, according to the mayor, is, quote, to have a little more housing in every neighborhood. That's his quote. Gentle density. This is the quote from the Department of City Planning. And 100,000 units over 15 years across the city. If you do the math, we have 59 community boards. 100,000 divided by 59 is approximately 1,700 units per community board over 15 years. So we're talking about 120 units a year per community board. This is as you see, 6,500 additional units just in one tiny area, again, of a full community board area, right? That's just this small area that we're talking about right here. It's about 10 to 15% of the community board area. So that just gives you an idea. Finally, this is the change to the zoning. So again, we have a similar R12, R11, et cetera. So R11 would be eliminated, just to let you know. R11 would be eliminated. R11 is a 100-foot minimum lot width, 9,500 square feet and square footage. The rear yards would go to 20 feet. That would be across the board. Side yards would go to the R1-2, which actually would go to the R2 that we currently have now, et cetera, et cetera. Open space ratio would be eliminated. The maximum building height would stay the same, but if you're building an apartment building, you won't need a peaked roof anymore in any of these zones, because they're going to want a flat roof to build an additional floor, right? And your backyard, well, it doesn't really matter if you go to a 20-foot backyard, because you're going to have an accessory dwelling unit there anyway, based on what they're proposing. So that's the R11. R12, as you can see, would go to that same set of numbers. And the R2A, which is, again, similar to the R2, would go from 3,800 to 2,850, 40 feet to 30 feet. All of the baseline FAR for this particular zone would go from a 0.5 to a 0.75. And then if you have an apartment building, up to a 1.0. So there's a 50% increase baseline for floor area ratio. And for those of you who don't are not familiar with this, having a 0.5 FAR is a pretty hefty FAR. Building a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot house on a 6,000 square foot lot, that's a pretty big house. But that would then go to as of right, 4,500 square foot house, not including all of the exemptions and other things that people get to build even bigger. Taking away your side yards, taking away your front yard lineup, your rear yards, maximum building heights, street walls, the open space ratio would be removed, and of course, no parking. So in conclusion, for the housing part, and we're going to briefly go to the economic part, the City of Yes Housing Opportunity Citywide Zoning and Land Use Proposal will not just create, quote, a little more housing in every neighborhood, as Mayor Adams has stated, or gentle density in low density neighborhoods, as the Department of City Planning has suggested. Rather, it will thoroughly gut the entire system of land use that has allowed neighborhoods around the city to grow in logical and predictable ways for over 6 decades, as per the long-standing goal of the Department of City Planning. Apparently, the new leadership at City Hall has had both collective amnesia of past actions and a new agenda that is a direct existential threat to the basic survival of our collective communities. This proposal does not consider the carefully negotiated rezonings of the past 20 years that have occurred throughout the city, rezonings that encouraged significantly more development in some places while contextualizing new development in others to protect neighborhood character while promoting orderly growth. The City of Yes Housing Opportunity proposal would throw all of that away in order to, one, create massive and unsustainable increases in density across the board in every lower density neighborhood, R1 through R5 neighborhood. Two, utterly ignore transportation needs and trends, particularly in lower density neighborhoods far from transit linking to Manhattan. Three, exponentially increase the stress on infrastructure and public resources of which it makes no mention. Four, deny actual housing affordability of any kind, despite constant buzzwords and meaningless rhetoric sprinkled throughout the document. Five, purposefully replace communities with high levels of owner-occupied housing in order to, quote, free up land for developers to build market-rate, high-density rental units for their profit. And six, severely compromise the democratic process in future land use decisions by communities and their elected officials through the massive expansion of as-of-right development and limiting ULURP. So now we're going to jump to the economic piece briefly. I hadn't even looked at this until a few weeks ago because I was so focused on the housing piece of it. But some of the things that they're proposing, and I'll just show you you saw these before, very pleasant looking slides. These are directly from the DCP proposal, but some of the things they're proposing they're very misleading. I'll give you a few. Here's number 16. This is one of my favorite ones. Corner stores create a process to allow for small new bodegas and other locally serving storefronts in residential areas. When I read the actual text, which by the way was 664 pages until a week ago, when they added in another 500 plus pages, actually about 500 pages to the document, I haven't even gotten to look at it yet. And they've given the community boards another month now to comment on it because they added in these additional 500 pages. Huh. The text for the corner stores says this, and I believe it's all properties within 100 feet of a corner on every residential block would be eligible to have storefront, retail, commercial, or office up to 2,500 square feet with City Planning Commission authorization. So what I did was I created a map to show what that would look like in Douglaston. That is the map, just for this single family area, not for the rest. Obviously, it would be everywhere. Every one of those dots is a property that could have commercial retail storefront up to 2,500 square feet. Now, when I showed a similar map to someone from DCP, they said that I was being misleading because there's no way they would ever approve all of that. And they said, maybe we'd approve 2, 3, 6, 10, or 20 of these, but we certainly wouldn't approve all 300 because they would still need to meet traffic. They couldn't generate a lot of traffic, and they'd have to have environmental review and this and that. And my response was, but they're prohibited now. Why would you want to allow this on every corner? Even the ability to have this on every corner in the whole city. And the response was, this is a deregulatory program. And that goes for the economic opportunity and the housing opportunity pieces. They are deregulatory programs. The idea is to deregulate land use in the city of New York. So that is one piece of this. The next piece that is disturbing to me is campus commercial. What this says is, enable resident-serving retail services and maker spaces at NYCHA and other residential campuses. Again, when I read this, it says something very different in the text. The text says, all property 1.5 acres or more, 1.5 acres or more, and that could be an assemblage of 1.5 acres on multiple lots, and it can be divided by a street, would be allowed to have up to 15,000 square feet of commercial on that property in a residential district. So again, I showed that in this community, these parcels would all be allowed to have commercial on them. This is the community church of Douglaston. This is Zion Church and their parking lot and their other parcels. This is the Douglaston Club. This is a wetland parcel that's still developable next to Alley Pond Park. Obviously in Riverdale and other parts of the Bronx, you do have plenty of properties that are 1.5 acres or more. So this would be something that would be, in my opinion, incredibly damaging to your communities. Adapting spaces for industries like film. Give businesses like film studios a rational process to allow them to adapt and expand. Well, actually what the text reads is, if someone has a 10,000 square foot business and the zoning says that it can only be 10,000 square feet, and they want to expand in place, grow in place, there will be a BSA special permit, a Board of Standards and Appeals special permit, to allow them to double their bulk. And if they need to expand again, then they will be allowed to double their bulk again. There is no limit to what they can do. Another one that I find really disturbing is home occupations, for example. Home occupations would allow, right now, a home occupation is fairly limited. It's a professional office. It's your home office, up to 500 square feet or 25% of your unit, a 500 square foot maximum. And again, it's very limited to very specific, very non-offensive uses. The change would be to 49% of your primary residence with no maximum FAR square footage limit, not FAR, square footage limit, and up to 3 employees working in your primary residence. So that was shocking. Life sciences, number 8, allowing regulated licensed labs to expand near hospitals and universities. And actually, what it would do is it would allow for labs and all sorts of other things that you don't want in your regular neighborhood commercial areas to be located everywhere and anywhere in the city. So that is that is not correct. It's not correct at all. Nightlife. This would allow a lot of nightlife everywhere across the city. And again, I've been to community board meetings where people have been extremely upset about this because they're already upset about the nightlife that they already have. Urban agriculture, they want to design, have vertical high density agriculture throughout the city. I don't want to get too much into it because it's just hard for me to even grasp. Number 14, enable micro distribution. That's one where they want to allow basically trucking, small distribution centers on every commercial strip in the city. So I think it's funny that the picture that they're showing is of a double parked UPS truck, half on the sidewalk. This is what will happen on every strip, that if they're allowed to go everywhere, that's what's going to end up happening. So as you can see, most of these, if not all of these, are very disturbing. They want to simplify district types, merge them together, take the use groups that we have, the 18 use groups, make them 10 to allow for more uses in more places. And the whole point about use groups and commercial types is to keep them where they're appropriate. If you want to add to the lists, do that. If you want to separate, if you want to add in, new modern uses, do it in the current framework. Don't create a new framework. Enable small scale production. That's manufacturing in commercial areas. It's plain and simple. So these are the kinds of things in the economic piece, which I am now going from community board to speak of and get people to understand what it is. And finally, and then I'll be quiet, and of course questions. On Friday, the mayor dropped the zoning text for the casino, for having casinos in the city of New York. We were under the impression that they were going to site-specific write zoning text for the 10 locations around the city that are being considered. The zoning text is as follows. All C4, C5, C6, C7, and C8 zones and all manufacturing zones will be allowed to have casinos. They will be allowed to have casinos, period, which also speaks to the future. Should there be another round of casinos in the future? Should there be additional gambling proposals that may not be casinos that could then locate in all C4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and all manufacturing zones? This was supposed to originally be part of economic opportunity, but they actually segregated it out and created their own zoning text. So those community board members, you will be hearing this coming up soon. So on that note, I will be quiet. I'm happy to answer as many questions as you have, and let's begin. So whoever is going to be moderating, please take
I'm going to be moderating.
Great.
And before we get to that, I'd just like to add to the description that Paul has presented a little commercial about the carbon problem. And so everybody knows that in recent years, we've experienced more frequent and increased rain events on the new normal with catastrophic flooding as a result. It is not an accident of nature. It is caused by humans. We do not need more development in any part of the city. We need more environmental and a sustainable city. And these proposals do not get us there, but instead provide protections remove protections we currently have. The use of concrete, cement, and iron used in building, housing, commercial, or industrial projects produces more impervious surfaces, which together also adds CO2, exacerbating the heat island effect. This creates carbon. We need more trees, green infrastructure, the restoration of wetlands, open and permeable front yards, and reusing gray water to grow rain gardens, green roofs, or green walls. And this is what carbon sequestration means. And it's a more difficult process, obviously. Some of the things that are in this carbon neutral, which is not really neutral, it's going to increase the carbon, is the decarbonizing the city's million-plus existing buildings will be a massive undertaking. Building owners will have to replace fossil fuel-based building systems with electrified systems and retrofit or replace exterior walls and roofs to ensure a high degree of efficient energy usage. That's something called the envelope retrofits. They will also be have to accommodate mechanical equipment and energy infrastructure equipment above the existing height limits as permitted obstructions. And they also have in there, they want to decentralize with distributed energy sources at multiple places throughout the grid, with sites up to 10,000 square feet in residential units and larger facilities in commercial and manufacturing areas. And so I just mentioned this because it is going to be voted on by the city council and probably get passed. And there's some good things in there. They threw them in at the end and they forgot to, but the focus is going to be, in addition to the carbon neutrality and the economic opportunity and whatever happens with housing, which, by the way, both Laura and I made our own separate comments on the scope of work, as well as Paul did, is going to not make this city capable of handling the new normal. And we will not be going in the right direction at all. So I will take questions. Bob Fanuzzi will take questions in the chat, and I will call on the people who have their hands raised, if there are anybody or any questions.
Karen, I'll just
sorry,
start with
Karen,
a few.
Sorry, Karen, before you start, and Robert, very quickly, I just want to pile on what Karen just said. One of the things that they're proposing to remove is the yards planting requirements. The yards planting, and this is one of the smaller pieces. I told you there's like 24 other things they want to do. Yards planting requirements was a big win that we had to stop people from paving over their front yards so that we can have permeable front yards for rain absorption and water absorption to deal with these flooding issues. This plan says, oh, that's too complicated. So we're going to minimize it as much as possible so people can pave over as much of their property as possible. So I just wanted to jump.
That was a big win that we just got concerning, the CSOs and the long-term control plan. And we were happy to include that. And that anybody who tore up their yard or did something different, they would have to make it, permeable. And now we lost it. And BCQ was involved in a group to increase private people working, private homeowners to do green infrastructure. And that was one of the things, oh, you know, you're gonna have to do something in your front yard, and now out the window. Well, maybe, we'll see. I mean,
Yeah, BCQ, everyone, check out our zero impact development guidelines that we did decades ago. So we have a question from the chat about your calculations, Paul,
Sure.
about maxing out the size of the lot. Can you tell us about how why you use that figure, and are there cases where places are not where homeowners or builders are not maxing out the FAR right now?
Generally speaking, the general rule of thumb is if you allow it, they will do it. This happens all over the city. It is rare that a developer will come in and say, you know what, I'm allowed 40 units, but I'm only going to build 30, or I'm only going to build 20. It just doesn't happen that way. So this is it's the worst case scenario. Of course, it's not the worst case scenario. It's the build out scenario. That's what it is. It means that, yes, if every property were built out to that level, that's what would happen. But it's the fact that it will be enabled, and that any one or dozen or 100 of these properties could have this.
Yeah. So Paul, another question. As you know, DEP signs off on sewer capacity.
Yep.
Are there any provisions in the current zoning? It's policy, not zoning, but does the scope of work or the environmental impact scope of work address sewer capacity?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because actually last week, Bob Holden, who's a council member for Middle Village and Glendale, that area, Queens, had a hearing, and there was a DEP was questioned, and the deputy director of the Office of Emergency Management was also questioned, and the deputy director stated that they have been left out of the entire process of the city of Yes. So that should make everybody extremely concerned. And the DEP put out a one-sentence statement saying, we are examining our, obviously we're an agency of the city and we are examining this. This plan, again, was designed by the Blast Committee. The Blast Committee was made up of the biggest developers, the biggest construction companies, the pro-housing advocates, and nobody else, essentially. There were no neighborhood groups, civic groups, environmental groups, good government groups involved in this whatsoever. So,
well, could you name what the BLAST is for, or what is that, an acronym?
I don't know. It was called the Blast Committee. It was the building something. It's an acronym. This mayor is very famous for acronyms. I'd have to look it up, but the Blast Committee was he did this about a year ago. He put it together. So, but it was all. If you look at the list of people on the Blast Committee, you would see who's on it. It's quite something. So sorry about that.
Another question about LL97. Is that mentioned, and will these buildings be asked to be compliant under a new LL97?
It's funny that you should mention that, because I come from an area that has a lot of co-ops and condos as well. And the local law 97 currently is really going to affect a lot of working and middle income co-ops. There was a big article about this, about the ones in Queens in particular. There is nothing about local law 97 in the city of Yes. I don't think there was a reference to it whatsoever.
Building and land use approval streamlining task force. Thank you,
streamlining. There we go. There's the word.
Anne. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you all. Karen, let's take a break from chat and go to any questions from the floor.
I don't think anybody has a hand up, but I have a question. Paul, can you explain what, on the build out? Oh, I see a question now. On the build out of the current zoning, I guess maybe you haven't been able to figure it out for the new zoning, but for the current zoning, what would be the build out for the city in the zoning that exists?
Well, yeah. So one of the things that when people routinely say, but what about the housing crisis? My first statement is, we've been in a continuous housing crisis in the city of New York since 1948. It's defined as anything 5% vacancy less, 5% vacancy rate or less. So we've had that since 1948, even though we lost 1 million people in the 60s and 70s, and we gained another 1.5 million, and we're losing population again. And so that's how the housing crisis is. The current zoning that we have today, and I want to make this very, very clear. The current zoning we have today, if it were to be built out according to the current zoning, if every property were to be built out to its maximum potential, it could accommodate another 8 to 12 million people. 8 to 12 million people, double to 2.5 times or 1.5 times the current population. Huge portions of the city are zoned. Even the low density neighborhoods are zoned for much more development than they have today. So whoever states that, again, in this report, they say, when these contextual rezonings were done and the lower density growth management areas in Throgs Neck and in Staten Island were put into place, development came to a halt. We all know, for those of us who live in these areas, we know that development didn't come to a halt. There are plenty of development that has occurred here in the last 20 years, tons of it, in fact. But this is about a narrative, as many of these things are, a narrative and a story. The story isn't necessarily true. It can be compelling to certain people, but it's not actually factual. The facts are, anybody who wants to build today, there are huge swaths of the city where people can buy property and build giant buildings or build smaller buildings or build small homes or build big homes. We have a very wide variety of housing that can be built here, period. This is about opening up lower density neighborhoods to allow high density and lower density neighborhoods, and to essentially break the backbone of the owner occupied portions of the city, the areas that are the actual property owners, the single and 2 family owners, the co-ops and condos in the city, versus the rest of the city, to allow for more market rate and luxury rentals. There's nothing affordable in this plan. Nothing. This is not an affordable housing plan. It is a deregulatory program to break open our zoning and allow, unleash the Kraken, as they say. So I hope that answers the question. I saw Assemblyman Dinowitz's hand up.
Yes, yes.
I'll try to phrase my statement in the form of a question.
Or you can make a statement.
Okay. So I'm not going to say we don't need more housing in New York, but I will say this. Number one, there are many tens of thousands of apartment units that are being kept empty by big landlords, by small landlords. They're claiming because they can't afford to, rehabilitate the units. I don't believe that for a second. I believe, I don't want to say I'm a conspiracy theorist because I'm not, but just like I think the closing of Rikers Island proposal is meant to give a gigantic gift to developers to develop that island. That's what I think. I think this is a gigantic gift to developers if this ever happens. Where I live on 237th and Henry Hudson Parkway, and in recent years, within a few hundred feet of my building, 5 other apartment buildings have already been constructed. 5 other buildings. There's plenty of building and development going on. Bob Fanucci, at the beginning of the meeting when we were chatting, talked about Tibbet Towers on West 232nd Street in Kingsbridge. A single family home, a 50 by 100 lot, was knocked down and purchased not so many years ago. And you know what they're doing with that 5,000 square foot lot? They're building a 7-story building, not even for an apartment building, but they're going to rent it to a school so that 300 kids on that 50 by 100 lot can use as a school where we don't even need a school. And we have example after example of this. I represent a number of different neighborhoods. Some of them are very high density, and they're all great neighborhoods. I represent Norwood or Kingsbridge Heights, where you have building after building after building. In Norwood, very few single-family homes. in Riverdale and in Woodlawn, we have a lot of single-family homes. And I think it would be a tragedy if we lost that. And I guarantee you, since we've already been seeing it under the current rules where single-family homes in locations where the zoning allows for it, they're knocking them down, they're building buildings. Most of them are ugly buildings. They're building them right up until the property line. And the infrastructure cannot necessarily accommodate what they're already doing. If this thing ever happened, at least the way you described it, and I don't pretend to understand 100% of this, but Paul, the way you described it, it would be destructive to many of our neighborhoods. And I don't mind having a few more people in my neighborhood where I live or in some of the other neighborhoods, but one of the things that's great about our neighborhoods is that we have a diversity of housing. We have a mix. We have single family homes. We have two families. We also have in Riverdale, we have 20-story buildings. We have 30-story buildings. And to lose that mix so that developers, and that's what this is all about. It's developers. You know, just a couple of years ago, there was a group, and I assume they're still around, I think it's called Open City.
Open New York.
Open New York.
Still, they're the ones pushing this. Trust me.
Yes. Well, they want to eliminate single family homes. Listen, I've never lived in a single family. I've lived in every type of housing, rent control, rent stabilized, NYCHA, Mitchell-on-McCall. I've lived in every conceivable type of housing except single family homes. Yet, I believe it is so important to preserve single family homes. I mean, I'd like to be able to walk around and not have a building right in my face all the time. I'd like to not see more trees cut down. And that's what this does. And by the way, the idea that they wouldn't require parking, are they crazy? I mean, maybe that works for Manhattan, I don't know. But if you live in the northern parts of the Bronx, in whether it's Riverdale or Woodlawn or on the east side and City Island and Throgs Neck, a lot of people need their cars, and the idea that they would build and not require parking means they'd have to park on the street. And what it's really meant to do is to strong arm people into not having cars. And that is an ideology which I don't think works for a lot of people, a lot of hardworking people in the Bronx who need their cars. So I hope, I mean, I'm not sure how this is going to progress, but I suspect this is going to run into a lot of opposition. But I don't think we should assume that. I think people have to work to make sure that that's the case. So I really thank you for this really detailed presentation and I'd like to, I don't know if we can get a copy of that. Is it already on the thing?
My plan is to also ultimately do one for Community Board 8 and for other parts of the Bronx. So that right now I've done 4 studies in Queens. My goal here is to do multiple studies around the city in these places because, just for everybody to know, the city is refusing to do its own studies. They have stated, well, we can't possibly study the whole city for this, so we're just going to come up with a few models, and we're going to plug that into the entire city, which is incredibly, lazy and misrepresentative, but on purpose, because obviously if they did the study the way that I did the study, you would see these numbers. Every neighborhood I've done this in, it's been between a 400 and 500% increase minimum that I've done. So I've done 4 so far. And as I said, I'm going to be doing this in Staten Island, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, etc., everywhere there is. And Assemblyman, I appreciate what you said. I do want to mention a few pieces to that. You're right about those tens of thousands of units. There's also tens of thousands of units, which may be partially those, but also investment properties for foreign owners. There's many, many people who have invested in properties from overseas who keep those units vacant. They are parking their money in those locations and the units are vacant. We've had over 1 million rent stabilized apartments deregulated in New York City in the last 25 years. Those were all affordable units. There was an article a few weeks ago in the Times about how over 100,000 units were lost over the last 50 years from multimillionaires buying up brownstones that had been divided into 20 units, throwing all the people out and converting it back into a single family home. If that's allowed under the free market, fine. But to focus on our communities, which again, we are not investors, right? 98% of the remember again, single family zoning is 15% of the city of New York. And yes, there are single family homes outside of that, but the vast majority of single family homes are in the 1-family zones or in the 2-family zones. We are not investors. 98% of the single family housing in New York City is owner occupied. 98%, 92% of the two families are owner occupied. And of course, there are many other areas as well that are owner occupied in terms of units. But it is it is very clear to me, and I agree with what the Assemblyman said, that this is a developer's wish list. This is what this is. It is a developer's wish list, and this administration has decided to go full throttle with all of this. And we cannot count on this not moving forward. We have to fight this tooth and nail the whole way. So are there other questions and comments?
Yes, Neva.
Neva.
Neva, what is your last name?
Heatt.
Okay.
My question is, in Manhattan, they have a lot of 6-story tenements in between the corner stone, the big buildings on the corner. Are they going to make them begin to build up in those, rezone those neighborhoods, knock down the brownstones, the 6-story tenements, and make them build higher? And also, are they realizing that, especially the North Bronx, we're so close to Westchester and Connecticut that people, the basic taxpayer is going to start moving out of New York City, and they're going to be stuck with either rich people who are not paying taxes or very poor people.
So the first thing, let me start with your second part first, and then I'll go back to your first part. If this goes through, there will be a huge exodus from the city of New York. We know this. We've already had conversations with a number of elected officials about this. Most of these homeowning areas in the city, we are the vast majority of what's left of the working and middle class in the city. You are 100% right. And it's not something that they seem to care or be thinking about. The knee-jerk response is, yes, but we need, they're telling us they need to build more housing. That's the response, instead of saying, maybe that would be a problem. There are other parts to that conversation, but I'd rather focus on your first part, which is there is a high density portion to this proposal, right? What I'm focusing on are the R1 through R5 zones. Obviously, there are the R6 through R10 zones. There are portions of Board 8 that are R6 and R7. So those are much more limited in their focus. The focus of this proposal, for the most part, is on the lower density neighborhoods. For the most part, there are some pieces in the higher density areas, but they are just to allow for additional modifications to allow for more density in those areas, but not to the same extent that they have done. They're really, really targeting and focusing on the lower density neighborhoods. So again, I have reviewed that portion of it. I'm actually working with another planner. He is focusing on the higher density stuff, while I am focusing on the lower density stuff, because he is more familiar with the higher density stuff. I know a good amount of it, but he's got the specifics the way I have the specifics for the lower density stuff. So I can come back to you after we put our heads together in a week or two with some kind of bullet points as to the answer to that question. As I said, what I can say is, for sure, they are looking to manipulate and allow for denser development even in the higher density areas, but the chances of that happening are much less, because we are what I call the low-hanging fruit, right? We're the neighborhoods that are easy to develop. We're the areas where it's cheaper to develop for these big developers, for them to come in, buy a house or a 2-family house or even a small apartment and tear it down and build something more dense. So that's my answer. Next, please.
Bob?
Bob Bender.
Thank you, Karen. Paul, first of all, thank you for that presentation, which was very informative. I appreciate it. I should begin by saying I grew up in a rent control department in the Bronx. I now live in a single-family house, which apparently would be subject to everything you've been talking about tonight. But I wanted to ask you to clarify something. You said that there are areas of the city where there is building that is not to the maximum that's allowed, certain density areas, not 1 and 2 family areas. But you also said that we have to assume that if this rezoning goes through, that builders will build to the maximum. So it's really a two-part question, which is in the areas of the city where there is building, but not to the maximum, not commercial building, but multifamily building that is not to the maximum. Why is it not to the maximum? Number one. Number two, it's not that we need more housing per se, it's that we need more affordable housing. That's the problem in the city. There's an affordable housing crisis. How do we, without eliminating 1 and 2 family homes, which is a horrible idea, how do we get more affordable housing in the areas where there can be more development without rezoning and driving people out of the city?
Okay, so the first piece, I'm going to kind of piggyback on what the assembly person said, which is, okay, there's like, for example, there's low density properties in high density zones all over the city. If you go to East Flatbush in Brooklyn, it's mostly a place of single and 2 family homes, but it's zoned R6 and R7. Developers in the last 10 years have found that the area has higher density zoning. They're starting to purchase these homes and tear them down and build high density. Prospect Lefferts Gardens is another area in Brooklyn. There are areas in the Bronx like this too, and in Queens. The entire North Shore of Staten Island, which is pretty suburban in nature, has about 150,000 people. The zoning on the North Shore is much denser than the housing that's there. Even in my neighborhood, for example, I live in a neighborhood of single family homes, but the potential development for each of these properties, I have a house that just went up next door to me. They replaced a 1,300 square foot house with a 4,000 square foot house, right? Because that's what the zoning allowed. So when I say that we can accommodate another 8 to 12 million people, that's because there are huge swaths of the city that, if you go on the website YIMBY, which is Yes in My Backyard, these are the people who are pushing all of this. But it's very informative. I kind of spy on it every day to see what they're putting up. And they say, okay, Flatbush or Astoria or Bushwick or whatever neighborhood they're putting up. And they show this, currently there's a 2-story, 2-family house at this location, and plans have been filed for a 7-story apartment building with 32 units. Expected completion 2025. The units will be X, Y, and Z. So this happens every day in every part of the city, all over the city. The idea that this proposal would help, quote unquote, solve any kind of housing shortage of any kind is nonsense. All it's going to do is create a Wild West situation. Now, your second part of your question is about affordable housing. I couldn't agree with you more. Affordability, this comes back to what I said. We lost over 1 million affordable units with 1 million rent stabilized units removed from rent stabilization, right? So one of the proposals I've put out there for the last 10 years is, instead of what de Blasio did, which was called ZQA-MIH, right? Zoning for Quality and Affordability, Mandatory Inclusionary Housing. What that did was create a mechanism where every time you rezoned an area, you had to rezone it to allow for affordable units. The problem is, every time they did that, those areas increased the speculative value of the properties. East New York is a great example of this. It took them 5 years to rezone East New York. And in the process, because all of the developers knew that the density was going to be increased dramatically there, the speculative value of the land went up 700%. 700%. So the affordability of the units immediately went down because the AMI, the index of the average median income, went up. So the point that I'm getting at is, the only way you can really do that is to create a situation where all R6 through R10 zones, currently R6 through R10 zones in the entire city of New York, mandate true affordable units in every new development. That would guarantee affordable units being generated, real affordable units being generated across the city of New York at scale. You could create tax incentives for developers to do this. Okay, that's one option. Option two, we have places like Creedmoor. Creedmoor is in Queens. It's between Douglaston and Belrose. It's a big campus. It's a couple of 100 acres. It's a Creedmoor Psychiatric Hospital. It has been dismembered over the years. Part of it became schools. Part of it became this, that, and there's a big chunk of it now that's up for discussion. Our communities have said, we are totally in favor of affordable housing. We want to see Mitchell-Lama type buildings going there. We want to see low density, medium density, and high density buildings going on these campuses. They just have to be done right. They have to have different levels of affordability, including very affordable, right? But also moderate and middle income affordable, and even rentals. We're totally cool with that. The devil is always in the details. Coming up with a blanket decision to change the zoning to allow for unregulated development across the city is madness. It doesn't do anything but, as the Assemblyman said, create a developer's dream by doing this. So I hope those answered, those are two of my ideas, but I hope that answers your question to some extent. Next, please.
Thank you. We
Thank
have
you.
Michelle. We have Michelle, and then we have Call. You want me to unmute you? Michelle, can you unmute?
Phil had a question about single-family homes before.
Okay, can Call Ford speak?
Yeah, I'm
He's-
here. Can you
okay.
hear me?
Yeah, while she tries to open her thing.
I just
Go
had
ahead,
a,
Carl.
Oh, she
I
got
live
it.
over in Sedgwick Avenue, over in the on the east side of Broadway in Van Cortlandt Village. Our neighborhood is under total assault of development.
Yes.
And
Yep.
not only are they adding apartment buildings where single family houses were, they are taking away parking spaces on the street and putting city bike racks out.
Right.
So just in the past month, we have a negative 150 parking spaces have been lost. If you calculate the city bike and the new development that are taking place in this neighborhood. And the question is I want to know why that a single family home can turn into a 20 unit apartment building. How could that happen in this neighborhood? And I've reached out to Dinowitz's office with no response. With all due respect, you're on the call. You have not responded to me on several issues. And this neighborhood is going to change rapidly. We are going to lose the quaint neighborhood that we live in over here in Van Cortlandt Village. And if I could show you a picture of what was built down on Bailey Avenue a few weeks ago and just completed, it's an abomination of what's happening. They took a single family home and built a vanilla box structure, no foliage, no nothing, just a cement sidewalk up for 50, 60 feet and back, and eliminated everything. So what's going on here? How do we stop this? What do we do? What is the process? Can we get involved and say, no, you can't do this, you have to give this? Across the street from me, 2 properties just sold within the last 30 days, okay? It's a corner lot. It's 2 single family homes, which could, next to the Jewish Community Center in that neighborhood. It'll change this neighborhood forever. It's unbelievable. It's unconscionable what's happening.
Okay, so here's the first thing I'll say. Your area was rezoned 15 years ago, partially, to replace some of the zoning, which was very high density, to R4A, which is a 1 and 2 family detached zone.
Right.
But it doesn't cover all of Van Cortlandt Village. It only covers a portion of it, the R4A zone. So on one side of the street it could be R4A, but on the other side of the street, it could be R6 or R7. Okay. So again, I'm just telling you that you are a mixed area in terms of your zoning, like Riverdale, similarly, and other parts of the city and parts of your community board. You have situations where you may have thought that property was in a lower density zone because it's mostly detached or single family or two family homes, but it could be zoned for very high density. This is the exact conversation that I was just saying before. So that's the first thing I'll say. As for City Bike and taking away parking spaces, and this goes again back to what the assemblyman said, the mayor has control over all agencies. The council has 3 powers: oversight, budget, and land use. The council can stop this proposal. If the council supports our position and kills this proposal, they have the ability to do that. They do not have the ability to stop the mayor from taking away parking spaces, because all of the portfolios of every agency are controlled by a single person, which I find offensive, frankly. But this is the way our system of government is set up under the city charter from 1989. So we would have to change the charter, and we'd have to change a lot of things, which I'm totally not opposed to. If people want to start working on that, it's all up to you. But my point is, the way that the government was structured, the council is the legislature, and the mayor has control and has, you know, the ability to control all of these decisions. And the only powers that the council really has, besides constituent services, is budget, land use, and oversight. And oversight is usually about an agency doing something wrong. Now, maybe that's where your councilman comes in and says, you know, why the hell did you do this? Why'd you take away 150 parking spaces? But they don't, beyond being able to hold those hearings, they don't really have a lot of power to change anything.
Mike,
That's the truth.
okay,
Yes.
so
Okay, Michelle has
Karen,
a
you have
question.
a couple more minutes.
Well, Michelle has a question, so we can come back to yours. Okay, Michelle?
Michelle and then Maria.
Maria? I don't see Maria. Okay.
Why don't we go to Maria, since then we'll come back to Michelle. Unmute Maria.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
you are unmuted. Yes, there we go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. A great presentation, Paul. So I sit on the zoning committee of Community Board 10 in the Bronx. And we are the community board that had the Throgs Neck up.
I'm aware. I know it intimately. Intimately.
Yeah, fiasco.
Yes.
So yeah, so my issue is that I sat in on the public hearing yesterday that the Bronx Borough President had with city planning. I saw Karen and Laura there and as well. So we are, as our zoning committee, we are having a special meeting in December, and city planning is coming to do the presentation on the city of Yes.
On economic opportunity.
I believe
Not on the housing piece, because the housing.
not on the housing. Okay.
Economic
So
opportunity. Yeah.
My question, my issue is that we get a lot of pressure from because we're appointed by the Bronx Borough President's Office as community board members. We kind of get like pressured into going along with what the Bronx Borough President wants. And I'm not saying we're forced into it by any means, because I voted against the Throgs Neck upzoning, and so did the rest of the community board. But it's kind of like in the back of our minds. I heard from another community board member in the Bronx, not 10, but a friend of mine from another community board, and she just made a blanket statement and said, you know what, all the community boards in the Bronx are voting for this. Well, you know, really, I don't see why that is. And I feel that if you or somebody with your kind of knowledge could come to our community board
Happy to do it. Sure.
Either on the same night as city planning.
I prefer to do it on another night, but I'm happy to go toe to toe too. I'm either.
Because what I'm afraid is going to happen is, all the community boards are being informed now of all this, but we all work hard at everything that we do, and we volunteer our time in community board. And I know some fellow members are into it, but they're not focused in on it. So they kind of just go along with the rest of the crowd. And if everybody else is voting yes, they're going to vote yes, without really knowing the real details and the catastrophic impact this is going to have on our neighborhoods. And I live on City Island, and even though we have special district zoning, and people keep saying to me all the
Doesn't
time,
matter.
it's not going to affect us. Well, maybe not initially, but it is definitely
It is going to affect you.
And this is going to be catastrophic for all of us. So I want as many people to hear what you have to say as possible. And if you want me to help arrange for you to come to our community board and speak about this, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Absolutely. Let's make sure before we get off, I get your information. We'll talk. I can talk to you tomorrow. That'd be great.
Okay.
So the first thing I'll say is, all the community board members are also appointed by the borough president of Queens, who has stated publicly he loves this, and every community board has voted unanimously against this so far, every single one, and they've told it straight to his face too, and dared him to try to have him remove them. So just to let you know,
just to let you know that one of the things that I was accused of during my no vote to have Throdsneck upzoning done was because of the affordable housing element of the buzzwords. They're always there, the affordable housing, when we know that isn't the whole idea of the whole point of these developers, is not because they have goodness in their heart and they want to do more affordable housing. But I was accused of being racist because I don't want Black and brown people in my neighborhood, and which is totally 100% not true. I grew up in the Soundview projects in the Bronx, and that's where I grew up. And there was a coalition of everybody. I grew up with the Rainbow Coalition from the day I was born. So it has nothing to do with racism. It has to do with the quality of life of people that bought their houses in 1- and 2-family communities and now are going to be forced to live amongst 5, 6, 7, 8-story buildings where there is no transportation hub, because that was the other thing they said about Throdsneck, that they put it there because it was very convenient for transportation. Totally untrue, total lie.
So and for all of you Bronx people, my mom grew up in Parkchester, and my grandmother grew up in Soundview. So I'm one generation removed, just to let you know. So
and he went to Bronx Science.
I went to Bronx Science on top of everything. So yes, I'm semi-local.
Paul, we're not able to get one more question to you, Michelle. Karen, we're running short on time now. Just tell us if you want to keep going.
Oh, Michelle unmuted. Maybe she can talk. Can you talk, Michelle?
Last question.
Okay, Michelle, why don't you put your question? Hey, Paul, why don't you
chat.
just give us some last words? And,
Sure. Well,
offer a calendar too for the next public comment for the housing unit coming up.
Yeah, I mean, my last words are, I'm happy to continue working with all of you. This is a group effort. That we are, the Queens Civic Congress is this umbrella organization. Like I said, I've been affiliated with them for many, many years, but this time I'm actually being retained to help stop this across the city, not just in Queens, obviously. I'm meeting with 20 groups in Brooklyn on Monday. I've already met with my Staten Island people. I've actually been connecting with people in Manhattan who are also horrified by this. So it's not, not just them against us kind of thing. There's a lot of people who are very, very concerned about this across the city. And it's of my opinion that this is do or die, that if we don't stop this, we're done. It's over for us, like really. And I've been doing this now for 3 years against the governor and all of this other stuff. So yes, so I was going to say, I'm going to put in the chat box right now. This is my email. Okay. So please contact me, and Maria, contact me immediately, and we'll trade. I see your head bobbing. We'll Here, so everybody, you see it, Paul Graciano 2013@gmail.com,
Right.
and get in touch with me. And you know, I would love to do this at as many boards and with elected officials. And you know, again, most of the elected officials we've spoken to so far are very opposed to this, but we need 26 votes. You know, there's
With the city
51 people
council.
on the city council. We need 26 votes, and we definitely don't have that yet. I mean, we're still early in the game, but it's very, very important that both of these proposals are consigned to the dustbin of history. The comment that someone, I'll say this very quickly. Last night we had 150 people in Bay Terrace in Queens with multiple elected officials, and I gave a big presentation. It's online. I can send you the link. It's not you can't really hear very well, but it's there. But there was a representative from a council member who had been at a meeting the night before, and she got up and said, "Oh, you know, Councilmember Lee, she knows what's going on, and she's very concerned about it, and she is not in favor of this as it is written now." And I said, "No." And that's exactly what I said to her. I said, "Lois, no, she needs to be against this, period. Not the way it is written now. Nothing about this program, nothing about this proposal is positive. This is being written for a particular cohort of people, meaning developers. It is not being written. There's nothing in there that's positive. There's nothing in there that can be finessed or compromised on." And I'm a guy who compromises all the time. I'm constantly doing this when I'm dealing with zoning changes and stuff like this. That has nothing to do with this. This thing needs to die. And you cannot come to us and say, "Well, I'm against it for now." That's not going to work. And don't forget, all of these people have to run for re-election in 2 years, right after they're going to vote on this. This is going to be voted on 1 year from now, the housing piece. And they're going to be running for re-election right away. So it is extremely important that we make sure that they understand that we are going to hold them to their vote, as they did in Throgs Neck.
Right.
Which
And Gary, one last question from Gary Axelbank.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to be very quick. Paul, you may not know, I know a lot of the people here know me. I host a pretty popular TV show about topical issues. So I'm saying publicly that we're going to invite you, and we'll have a full forum on this so everybody in the Bronx can at least understand what it is. So I see your email, but I'll work with Karen and Bob.
Just shoot me an email. I'll send you my phone number. That's fine.
Yeah, we'll get it together. But
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to say that because this is obviously a very important issue.
I thank you for the invite, and I certainly am happy to come on.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, and now Laura wants to sum up the next steps.
Well, first I'm going to run out and see if I can find land use for dummies. We definitely need information. So where do we go from here? This is a very first step. I'm very proud to say that, you know, I've spoken on the phone with all different groups all over the borough, and I see so many of you on here tonight. And so this is a first step. Karen and I, with Paul, we're going to try to come up with a very brief, like 1-page.
I have it. It's done.
Oh, very good.
I finished
Okay.
it yesterday. We handed it out last night. I will forward it to you.
We're
Sorry,
gonna
I
take
should
a
have
break.
sent it to you today.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Finished.
It's
Finished.
December
Yep.
is the holiday. So, and we will be sending you things, but really in January, we need to expand. We need more civic groups. We need more people. We need to get our influence and move in the right direction on all these proposed zoning changes. And we can do it if we are unified and we grow. I mean, this is just a very first step. And that's it. So look forward to getting this fact sheet, bringing the fact sheet to you, the members in your respective groups, and we will continue this whole conversation. So did I leave anything out? We will form a coalition. We will sign on to this coalition, and
your coalition will be working with other coalitions as
exactly
one big
exactly
coalition. That's exactly.
I told you the Bronx would be in the house. Right. So first step is we're getting the Bronx, and we'll get this fact sheet, we'll get the Bronx, and then we will do 5 boroughs for
Yeah,
sure.
so the housing thing is probably not gonna happen until what they say is the spring. But when it
April.
happens, it's gonna be boom, boom, boom. It's gonna be a lot of stuff. And so we have to work up to it. There's gonna be an EIS, there's going to be a ULURP, and it's a real ULURP because it has an impact. And so, you know, it's important to be on top of this. It really is also important to just kill that economic opportunity thing.
You have to kill that as well.
They're gonna ask you to pick which ones you like and which ones you don't like. It's no use because if you say yes, but we don't like this, they're gonna ignore that. They just know the yes. They check it off in a box and that's it. You gotta look at the economic, because one of the things that Paul didn't mention, which he will continue after I say it, there is a connection between the carbon neutrality and the economic opportunity, and somehow, I don't really know
The
how,
housing.
they enable the opportunity to be bigger. And
Yes.
so if you actually kill the economic opportunity one, it's an easier kill. But we could still
Yeah.
wait until the fall.
Yeah,
the spring.
the economic piece enables the housing piece. The carbon neutrality piece is a little separate, but the economic piece absolutely enables the housing piece. And most people don't understand that. I read the text, and the text has sections that says, this has really nothing to do with this current section, but when other sections like the housing opportunity section, then it will come into effect. So it actually says that in the text. So it's very important to understand this is a scheme. This is, you know, this is not just a small thing. This is a major scheme, and they're all interconnected with each other. So we have to stop that. So so again, thank you so much, everybody, tonight. I really appreciate it. Again, everybody feel free to email me. Maria, we will talk. Gary, we will talk. And anybody else who needs to talk to me, happy to do it.
And a happy and healthy holiday to everybody. We
Right,
will
yeah.
stay in touch. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, everybody.
Very much
Good night,
for
everybody.
organizing this.
Good
Got
night.
it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm gonna turn off the recording now.